Welcome back, folks. This is Shane. In today's video, we're doing something a little bit different. I thought it might be fun to go through the best amplifiers that I've ever owned and the reason why I sold some of them, not all of them, and some I purchased multiple times because I'm a guitar player slash idiot. I'm sure if you're a guitar player, you may have sold something and then rebought something very similar to it or the exact model down the track. So that's what this video is about. We're to go through some of the best amps I've ever owned at all price points. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want to check out others like it, I'll leave a link up in the cards and you can check out the entire playlist. Let's get into it. The first amp on this list is the Marshall DSL 40CR amplifier. This is loaded with a single 12-inch speaker. I replaced the stock Celestion with an Eminence Texas Heat, and it's by far the most plug and play amp I've ever owned. Very, very close to another one that you're going to hear about on this list. Now, what I love about this, it's got a great clean channel, it's got a great crunch channel, and then it's got the what I call the Carlos Santana channel, which is the ultra gain one, which can have as much gain as you like. No pedals required. It's got an effects loop. It also comes with a foot switch, so you can turn that effects loop on and off and switch channels, or you can upgrade and get a much larger foot switch that will allow you to kind of go between each of all four of the channels. So that's right, there's two crunch channels, the ultra gain and a clean, which is cool. So it's by far the most versatile amplifier that's on this list that I've ever owned. Now, one of the cool things about it is no pedals required. Take it to the gig, plonk it on the floor, and you're good to go. I love the tones of this amp. Everything about it was great, except for that it was a little bit bright with the stock speaker. So I ended up changing out the speaker to an Eminence Texas Heat, which took off a little bit of that top end, gave it a little bit more in the low end or low mids, and I really dig it. It's one of my favorite live amps of all time. Usually when I take this amplifier out, a lot of the venue owners go, you got the Marshall tonight. I'm like, yep, that's the one, because it just rocks. This amp totally cooks, and it will cover anything from blues to rock and roll to whatever you want to throw at it. It's really cool. It's a very underrated clean channel. It's almost as good as a Fender. The second amplifier on this list is a very similar one to the Marshall in some regards. It's the Supersonic 60 from Fender. The main difference between this and the Marshall, other than, of course, the power tube section and all that kind of stuff, is the fact that this was a 6L6 amplifier and the Marshall was an EL34. So very different sort of voicing and punch just in terms of the attack on the note. Now, this amplifier was loaded with a Celestion Vintage 30, and what made this amp totally rock was the drive channel section, or what they call the burn channel. It had two gain stages, and it cascaded beautifully, and you get so much just beautifully smooth overdrive out of this thing, or you could send it into gnarly territory for more of a rock sound. This amplifier also had two different voicings on the clean channel, which made it great. You could get that deluxe reverb slash Vibrolux type setting with the button in one position, and then get more of a tweed mid-heavy sound with the button in the other position. This was a great pedal platform, and again, you don't have to use this with pedals because the burn channel or the drive channel was just so good. The only thing with that speaker that was in there, I used to always remember having to turn the mids up all the way on the drive channel. But to get away with it, it worked fine. And that was one of the few amps that I never took pedals with, and it just made me focus more on my playing. As I mentioned, they're heavy. So just get prepared to buy a trolley if you can still find a Supersonic 60. Now, the Supersonic 22s are much smaller and lighter. They don't quite have the same 3D projection as a 60, just based on their configuration and physical size, but still a great amp. If you want to check them out, links will be below. The next amplifier on the list is the Two-Rock Studio Pro 22. Now, I thought, when I bought this, I was so blown away by the sound. And then I got sick of it. I got sick of it really quickly because it didn't have that sparkly top end that I was so used to hearing on the Fenders. And I knew that going into it, that it wasn't gonna do exactly what a Fender did, but the compromise was a much fatter and thicker tone that I was ever used to. You know, listening back to those live clips, it sounded pretty damn good. It was some of the best tone I've ever heard, especially with the 335. It's just a really great pairing, but there's something that gets a little fatiguing to me about that rolled off sort of two-rock tone. It just doesn't have the niceness in the top end, you know, those glassy bell-like frequencies that Fender amps are known for, but you get in return a really thick and full sound that really fills the room. Now, being that I owned the head and cabinet combination, this was one of those situations where it sounded way bigger than it should have for 22 watts. It sounded more like a 30 or 40 watt amp, One of the great things about the Two-Rock Studio Pro 22 was the effects loop. It actually had a volume control on the back, so sometimes you might throw some sort of effect through the effects loop that drops your volume, or as soon as you click it on, you go, man, I wish I had a bit more volume on it. It had a volume control on the back, so that was good. Now, while this amplifier had a gain control, it was basically a clean/off clean pedal platform, and listening back to the tones, it sounded great. You know, part of me is always like, maybe I should get another one of these down the track. Not a Studio Pro 22, but maybe something with the 6L6 tubes as opposed to the 6V6. There is a big difference in the amount of oomph. Although, that being said, that speaker box that came with the Studio Pro 22 was an absolute monster, and the speaker just was the perfect match for that head. But as I mentioned before, I really did miss having that Fendery sort of glassy clean tone. As great as the Two-Rock is, and maybe it's more of a premium sound, I just got bored of it pretty quickly. So yeah, I ended up flipping it, going back to the Fender amps, but in hindsight, listening back, some of the best tone I ever had. The next amplifier on this list, you probably saw this coming if you're a long-term subscriber. I've had 3 of these amps over about the last 15 years. This is the Red Stripe Peavey Bandit 112. These amps are awesome. This is a solid state amplifier with trans-tube technology that I love. I think the stock speaker sounds great in this amp. If you want to upgrade it, you can throw in something like a Texas heat speaker. It's going to drastically increase your tone. I have a speaker website as well, guitarspeakerguide.com, where I cover all of these, or most of these amplifiers and their various speaker configurations. And after trying a number of different ones in the Peavey Red Stripe, the Texas Heat was where I ended up settling on, and it's such a great amplifier. I currently don't have one of these amps, and the reason I've had 3 is I've been lucky enough to find them for about 175 Australian dollars, which isn't much. So every now and then, once I start, shuffling things around, maybe move something on, I'll spot another one on the local, message boards. I'll grab that. Why not? I could use another Peavey. So these are great amps. They handle pedals well. You can use them without pedals. And they just are very musical for blues, rock, or if you want to use that modern or metal channel, you can go ahead and do that as well. But the vintage channel sings for the kind of music that I play. It keeps up in the live mix, and out of all the solid state amplifiers I've played over the years, the Peavey Bandit is still the best. Better than the Roland Blues Cubes in my opinion, especially because they're so inexpensive. You can buy these for next to nothing. The Red Stripe ones, you can pick them up on the used market. I know the price did increase a bit over the years, but yeah, they're still a great amp, and you can find them dirt cheap if you're patient enough. I would still take the Red Stripe ones over the new ones any day of the week. Having owned both, I can absolutely tell you that's the case. So Peavey Bandit 112, check them out. Look for the red stripe around the sides. Doesn't matter which version of that it is, they all sound great. Up next is the only Canadian-made amplifier on the list, but what a great amp. If you get a chance to play one of these, give them a go. This is the Yorkville Traynor YCV40. This was the first professional valve amplifier that I purchased, and it drastically changed how I was heard on stage. People were commenting on my playing more, because not only did I have better tone, but I was sticking out of the mix far more than my old piece of junk. So these amps are great, and if you don't know these, they're basically like a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe. They're Canadian clone version, basically. So the setup of them is almost identical. You get a clean channel, and then you get a drive channel with an extra boost switch that can then take it into more gain territory. But these amps kick ass. They don't sound like a Fender. They sound very different. Some people prefer the Fender Hot Rod Deluxes. Well, I think most people would, but a lot of people love the Yorkville Traynors. Up until Fender finally fixed their drive channel on the most recent Hot Rod Deluxes, the Yorkville Traynors were wiping the floor on the drive tones with the Hot Rod Deluxe. It wasn't even close. I'm actually going to try and find one of these amps again, because I almost feel like if I had that same amplifier now, I would have the tone that's in my head without question. And I've gone through a lot of other amplifiers up until this point, way more than what's in this video. But overall, for a 6L6 based amplifier, these things sound really great. Quite a while ago now, I ended up buying the YCV50B, which was an EL34 version of this amp. But the YCV40 with the 6L6 output tubes was the one that I really liked a lot more. I'm actually going to look for one of these, and I'm going to do a re-review if I get my hands on one. This next amplifier is the Fender Super Reverb reissue. Loaded with 4 10-inch Jensen speakers. I got this for an absolute bargain. I ended up selling it to one of my good friends, Dom, who was on some of the live clips that we've shot over the years. And man, every time I hear it, I'm like, why did I sell this thing? I know why I did, right? It was a little bit too big. There was nowhere to hide it in my car, so I had to leave it on the back seat. I kind of don't like doing that with big amplifiers, but the best clean tone out of all of the amplifiers on this list, in my opinion, better than the 2-Rock, better than the Marshall, better than some of the other ones we're going to get to as well. Just an epic clean tone and great pedal platform. My only small criticism of the Super Reverb is once you get them to about 5.5 on the volume, which is pretty loud, they don't really get any louder. So they're not like a 60 watt amp or anything like that. I think they're around a 40 or 45 watt amp, so that the headroom isn't quite as much as you would think. So once they start getting saturated, they just keep getting more saturated. And if you're pushing a clean boost into them, then it takes it over the edge really, really easily. So maybe not the most clean high headroom amplifier, but if you can get them to their sweet spot between about 4.5 and 5.5, somewhere around there, that's the spot these amps absolutely sing. And if you've never heard of Tommy Castro, go check out his live at the Fillmore, the best Super Reverb tone of all time. One of my biggest influences and one of the reasons why I ended up getting that amp. Now, believe it or not, if you're new to the channel, my amp of choice for a number of years was Vox amps. I used to love playing those with the Tele, and if you've never played a Vox, a Tube Screamer, and a Telecaster before, give them a go. It's a really great combination. I was playing both a Vox AC15C1 and the AC30C2. The AC30 rocked. It was loud enough to keep up in a live situation, much more so than the little AC15. But the AC15 tone-wise sounded great. But I'm going to put the AC30C2 into this list because not only was it just absolutely musical without any pedals, the top boost channel sung. It was the best fun. It had a great spring reverb, and it also had one of the best onboard tremolo circuits I've ever heard. And still to this day, Vox get that right. In my opinion, it wipes the floor with the Fender sort of tremolo circuits. Vox just get it right. It actually, imagine your volumes here, the Vox tremolo circuit feels like it goes above and below your volume, whereas the Fender one kind of always feels like it's ducking your volume a little bit more. So that's the quickest explanation of why I think it sounded great. Awesome with pedals, awesome without pedals. Even though they're heavily mid-scooped, all you really needed was a Tube Screamer and you could take it over the edge. And this was my combination of choice for many years. I got lots and lots of clips of me playing a Vox amplifier. The Vox AC30C2 weighed a ton. It was one of the biggest, heaviest amps I've ever purchased. It had two big carry handles on the top, and it was just an absolute ball breaker to get around. There was probably no other amplifier on this list that was as heavy as that. Even the Supersonic 60 only had that one speaker, whereas the Vox had two Celestion greenbacks. So it weighed more, it was heavy, but man, it sounded great. But I just got sick of lugging it around, and my ear kind of went back to that whole Fender tone thing, as it's gone back and forth with many other brands over the years. But in terms of just the straight up classic tone for a Telecaster, the Vox AC30C2 would be my choice if I had to get either that or the 15 for playing live, at least anyway. If you're just playing at home, get the 15 or the 10. But yeah, if you're playing out live, you do need those 30 watts. It makes a big difference. The next amplifier on the list is one that I still currently own, and I've had two of these over the years. My first one, I ended up putting a Lowrance speaker in there, and it sounded fantastic. I sold it, regretted it almost instantly, and then about a year later, I got another one. This is the Fender Blues Deluxe Reissue amplifier. This is a single 12-inch 40-watt amp that just, man, it peels the paint off the wall if you need it to. It sounds great with pedals. The clean channel is where it's at on this amp. Just a beautiful, usable clean channel. And the drive channel is okay, but it's nowhere near as good as many of the other amps that have been on this list. But after replacing the stock speaker, which back then was not very good, with an Eminent Swamp Thing, it drastically changed the tone of that amp for the better. And I love it. It's just my go-to anytime I want just my classic my tone, you know, like the tone that I love, using my pedals, plug in, and I'm good to go. Another great thing about the amp is physically it's not too big, so you can chuck it in the back of your car and no one will see it. It's easy enough to carry, all that kind of thing. While it's got a bit of weight there, but it's nowhere near as heavy as some of the others. It's not even as heavy as the Marshall, while still being almost as physically big. I think the cabinet size of the Blues Deluxe just allows it to really fill a room easily. And being that it's got that 40 watt rating or somewhere around there, Then the 6L6 power tubes, it really allows this big bloom of sound that, you know, not many amps have. I really put this up against much more premium amplifiers with that speaker because I've compared it to some other 2-rock amps, and I kind of still preferred the Fender amplifier with the modified speaker. So you can make your sort of bog standard off-the-shelf amplifier sound a heck of a lot more boutique just by replacing the speaker. So the Fender Blues Deluxe is definitely an amplifier on this list. I love it. I use it all the time. This next amplifier totally caught me by surprise. This is from an Australian company called Artist Guitars. This is the Artist Tweedtone 20R. These are now available in the US, and I'll leave a link down below as well, and you can check them out. These are the Blues Junior killers. I think as of posting this video, I'm not sure if my comparison between the Blues Junior and the Artist Tweedtone has gone up. I've already shot it. If it has, I'll link it up in the cards and you can check it out. Just a bigger cabinet, it's 20 watts, you get 2 dedicated channels. So you not only get a dedicated clean channel that has a fairly good amount of clean headroom, given that it's a 20 watt amp, you also have one of the most musical drive channels of all time. This is almost as musical as the Marshall drive channel. It just does a lot of good things. You can get that off clean tone all the way through to high gain tones. The gain control on it is phenomenal. Now, these amplifiers are dirt cheap here in Australia when you compare them to something like a Blues Junior. I think Blues Juniors are great. I've owned a few over the years, but none of them I would take over the Artist Tweedtone 20R. Now, these are very similar amplifiers to that of either a Classic 30 or a Blues Junior, being that they're EL84 based, so you're getting a more chimey sound, sort of voxy to some extent as well, but a much bigger sound. And surprisingly, these are loaded with my least favorite speaker, the Celestion 7080. But after trying this amp with 3 different speakers, it works. I like the 7080 more. So yeah, it's shocking for me to admit that, but this is the best speaker for the job, in my opinion. I'm yet to try anything else I prefer over it. This is an amp I've used live maybe 50 times. It has been so good because it's small, it's portable, it's loud, it takes pedals well on the clean channel. You can saturate the clean channel just by cranking it up. Or if you don't like to use pedals, you can simply use the drive channel. It's got everything I like in an amplifier. It also has a digital reverb, which means there's no weird oscillation or anything going on when it comes to the reverb. Sometimes the really small compact amplifiers can suffer issues with reverb just becoming clangy or a little bit weird. But in terms of this amp, I love it. I think it's one of the best, most musical amps out there, especially given its price. If you want to find out about it, links will be below. I'm going to just quickly throw in a couple of honorable mentions. I'm going to keep this really short, but I'm going to say the Fender Deluxe Reverb, arguably one of the best smaller combos I've ever owned. Great pedal platform, all that kind of stuff. I've owned a few of them over the years, but the best one I ever had was the 65 Deluxe reissue. I had a 68 as well, but I preferred the 65 long term. There was something cool about the 68 when it came out, but yeah, I ended up just keeping the 65. That was another one that I purchased that I sort of regret getting rid of, but another good friend of mine's got it, so it's all good. And I have to throw in the Fender Mustang V2, either the 3 or 4 amp. I think I like the 3 probably the best looking back at it now. So yeah, great digital modeling amp. I did that full series called Mustang Monday, and it was such a really great playing experience. It was the first amplifier that I really felt like, you know what, I could get away with playing this live, it sounds that good. And then a lot of my friends who play live also got them, and they all use them live too. Some of them still do to this day. So very usable, great 3D projection, and extremely loud. So yeah, if you've still got one, let me know in the comments. So there you have it. That's the best guitar amplifiers I've ever owned. And stay tuned because I'm going to do the worst guitar amplifiers I've ever owned coming up in a list. I'm going to justify why that was the case. I kind of hinted at a couple of the reasons for some of these amplifiers with the love-hate relationship, but there's some that I would never even look at again after paying full price for them and being very dissatisfied. But yeah, let us know what your favorite amp is and some of the best amps you've owned over the years. Yeah, I spent a lot of money on amps, and I can't wait to see if I can get my hands on a Yorkville Train or YCV40 again. I'd like to try and find a new one if I can. Or if I can find one that's been used, that's still in really great condition, I'll definitely like to pick one of these up because, yeah, I almost feel this might lead into another video that if I just had stuck with that first amplifier, my tone would be pretty much the same, and I guess we'll find that out. My only memories of playing the Yorkville were very favorable. So thanks again, and we'll catch you soon. See ya.